off with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we have a special guest in the house. I'm going to ask him to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You'll hear more from him in a while. Just to turn our cell phones on. Here. Okay. And again, welcome to the first timers. And if anybody's not getting his notification or forgets to get it, sign up in the back. If the newcomers want to come back, leave your name in the back on a little slip back there, and you'll be on our mailing list or our email list, and you'll be notified. For those of you who newcomers, I want you to know we have several World War II veterans in our audience, and we always like to recognize them with a show of hands. It was a pleasure. And I know that we just went through Memorial Day. I hope everybody went and bought a mattress or whatever you're supposed to do, have a hamburger. And also took time to remember what Memorial Day is all about. And I'm afraid nowadays people don't understand it well enough, but maybe we'll get there. Speaking of which, Bernie Lynn is here. Bernie, you somewhere? He'd like to give a brief memorial to his dad.
Thank you. And this being Monday, initially it was Decoration Day for the Civil War losses and Memorial Day. And I'd like to read this letter my father wrote on VJ Day, or they call it V Day, on August 15th. My grandmother sent 4 of her boys to the war, 3 in the European theater. My father was in the Pacific theater in India with the Flying Tigers. One made the ultimate sacrifice February 1945 in France. Dear Mom and family, Wednesday, 15 August 1945. I haven't written in the last couple of days because of the war, and I expected to be only a matter of hours until it was official, so I waited till now to write. Now, as you know, it will be some time before I get home, undoubtedly several months, but at least you know, if nothing happens, that I'm coming home. The days will be mostly sports, etc., and education, so you can see it won't be bad. Most everyone is celebrating, but not me, for it will be some time till we get home, and when I get home, then I will celebrate. All I can say now is thank God that He has ended this horrible war. This day is V-Day, but you, like all Gold Star mothers, know we must pray to God that this is the last war, and other mothers may not have to receive the sad words of the loss of a sweet son. Glenn and all others having died for this day, and we shall never forget what they have done for us. Their reward in heaven shall be great. I will say good night. God bless all of you, and take care of yourself and Pop. Again, I say that we should be all thankful for God ending the war. Your loving son, Bernard.
I'd give that one an amen. Thank you very much. Is Janice Johnson here tonight? No. Janice Johnson, a couple months ago, gave me this uniform. It was her dad's. It was for the 106th Infantry Division, 2/3 of which was captured during the Battle of the Bulge. I believe he's in the 3rd that wasn't captured because his ribbons suggest that he's had 4 battle stars on his European theater ribbon, so I guess he made it through. He passed away some time ago, and she wants to put it in the hands of somebody who would appreciate it and use it as a reenactment. We'll take it over to Reading and see if we can't drum up some interest there. But in the meanwhile, I found there is an organization of the 106th that may have some interest in it. The point of the story is it's just a wonderful thing for her to do, and she wants to have somebody wear it in a true 106th reenactment in honor of her dad. Bob Watkins,
Okay, thank you. I am the treasurer of this august organization. I'm also the guy that sells the used books. And this is the opportunity of a lifetime for someone in this audience tonight. Because I have not a 39 book set of Time Life World War II. I have the unofficial 40th volume now. So it's a silent auction. The bids are up to $135, and bidding will close at the end of the evening. So if you've always dreamed of having the Time Life series to decorate your family room or your living room, this is your opportunity. Don't let it pass you by. And the good news is I don't have to take it home. My wife will not kill me. Also, we are now in a possession of DVDs of prior speakers. Last month I took some orders, as you know. Each DVD is $20. I have DVDs from Art Stamos. Going back, Staymates, right? I'm sorry. Going back to August 2015 through last month's meeting, through April 2016. That was Dr. Manfred Brahman. So if you're interested in these, I will be selling these at the used book table. If I run out, you can put your name on the list and we'll order you a copy and I'll have it for you next month. Thank you.
Our resident bookie. Thanks, Bob. Rich Burton?
Hello. There's a Vietnam roundtable that meets on the second Thursday at 8000 Dairy Street. And next Thursday we have George Knoll going to talk. He's from Ellers, and he was in the First Air Cav. And then in July we have two men from Anvil going to talk, Ron White and Pete Heisey. So that's one. And then this Sunday down at Messiah, there's going to be a Vietnam Veterans Welcome Home celebration down at Messiah College, which is down Route 15 in Grantham. If you're interested in going to that, I can give you some information, but you have to register either online or by a phone call. And then I'd like to give a shout out to Charlie Lloyd for all the hard work he's been doing trying to get us speakers, not only for here, but also for Reading this coming weekend, and also down in Allentown at the Lehigh World War II Roundtable. Charlie really deserves a salary from this group for all the hard work that he's been doing. So, Charlie, I wanted to give you a thank you very much.
I'm Rick Haas. This is for the Hershey Civil Roundtable. We're going to meet on the 16th of June at the Country Meadows Hershey, and this title is it's called The Virginia Who Saved Lincoln. So if you want to know who the Virginia was, you have to come to our meeting. And it's by Bob O'Connor. Also, I don't know if you've been seeing in the news, the 16th, I'm going to get the right, 17th, 18th, and 19th in Harrisburg. There's going to be a 3-day event. Harrisburg in the Civil War. It deals with strictly what happened in the Harrisburg area during the Civil War, including just before the Gettysburg campaign. In the back there, next to us on the Civil War, on the Vietnam Roundtable, there's also flyers for that. It's a 3-day event. They have several different tours, and the average tour is a whole $5. So you get to see where some of the people, the troops in camp, just on the other side of the West Shore, and a lot of history of what happened during the Civil War in Harrisburg. And lastly, October the 15th, we're going to do a Civil War trip down to Gettysburg. It's East and South Cavalry Field, so we also have flyers back there. So if anybody interested, just please grab a flyer back there or talk to me after the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky. Anybody else got anything? Okay. As Rich mentioned, tomorrow through Sunday, the World War II Days at Reading Airport, great activities, displays, reenactments, all sorts of military. It's its own miss. Do yourself a favor and go over there, spend at least one day there. It's terrific. And Friday is the easiest day to get there, by the way. It's going to be a big crowd. Most important reminder, the helmet committee. Did we get our full committee tonight? No.
Need a volunteer.
We'll have to get a volunteer. Ed, you're a volunteer. Thank you. The helmet committee will accept your gracious donations at the end of the evening to help keep us going and do good things for veterans. We're greatly appreciative of that. Charlie, for just a second, I'm going to skip you and then come back to the speakers. We'll talk a little bit about June. You know, I like to give a little ramble about something that happened during the war. And a week and a half ago, I happened to be in a rough place in St. John, New Brunswick, where they serve beverages of various tastes. And at a table not far from me were 6 very elderly gentlemen. And they were speaking with a British accent, and they were wearing some memorabilia. And I couldn't resist to ask them, "Who the hell are you?" They're all Brits. 3 of them had immigrated to Canada back in about 1950. The other 3 were still from Great Britain. But they came over to visit their mates. There were 6 evacuees from Dunkirk. They were evacuated in June 2nd, 1940. Wow. They were there saying this would probably be our last reunion, and we're going to enjoy it. So they were drinking a pint of the good stuff. Interesting guys. And you know, some of the things they told me, you can read in the books about how, well, 2 of them had to wade out in the water this deep, waiting for a ride. And they were there for a long time. Depends on when you got there and when you got out, but it was still amazing. I guess there's about 380,000 people were evacuated. Amazing. This is, so I wrote down a few notes about it. By June, after a month of the German blitzkrieg, in which Rotterdam and other Dutch cities were attacked from the air, the Dutch armies have surrendered, Belgium surrendered, and the evacuation of British and French troops from Dunkirk is now underway. The Dunkirk evacuation, codenamed Operation Dynamo, was the evacuation of Allied soldiers from the beaches and harbor of Dunkirk, France, between 27 May and 4 June 1940. The operation was decided upon when large numbers of Belgian, British, and French troops were cut off and surrounded by the German army during the Battle of France. In a speech to the House of Commons, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had called the events in France, quote, a colossal military disaster, saying the whole root and core and brain of the British Army had been stranded at Dunkirk and seemed about to perish or be captured. The Germans had them surrounded and could have annihilated them. There was a general wanted to do it from the air, but he couldn't. Goering, sorry, thank you. And the tankers could have gone in probably and done a job, but the ground was soggy, and they were just worried about losing the tank, so they knew they'd need them later on. So Hitler ordered a stop to it for a while until they could get themselves organized. And this has been considered one of Hitler's largest military blunders. But he also believed that once the British had left European soil, they would not come back. They gave just enough time for over 800 boats of all sizes to evacuate 338,000 British and French soldiers. We have somebody in the house. Did the British come back? Lieutenant, did the British come back? Yes, they did. So, Churchill gave the second of his 3 major inspirational speeches following this. The earlier was the blood, toil, tears, and sweat speech, and subsequently he gave this was their finest hour address, which were delivered to the people over the airwaves. This one was spoken only to the House of Commons, but it was quoted often right after it. and it's called "We Shall Fight on the Beaches" speech, in which he hailed their rescue as a miracle of deliverance. And I'm going to quote a little bit of what he said. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Pretty stirring stuff. 1940. We got there in 1944, as you know, in June 1944. So much has been said about it, and if you reenact it, you kind of know the story. D-Day, etc. Just after midnight, as more than 175,000 troops landed in Normandy, the largest invasion forces in history. It includes 4,000 invasion ships, 600 warships, and 10,000 planes. That was 4 years later. Imagine what the Brits endured for 4 years before we got there. Pretty damn amazing. So hats off to you. Okay, back to Charlie Lloyd. Charlie Lloyd has been a busy boy lately, organizing all sorts of things in Reading for the speakers there, and of course recruiting speakers from here, and I'm sure he has a few words to say, and we'd like him to introduce tonight's speaker.
I'll take it. Am I on?
Yeah, speak up and hear it.
I got it there? Okay. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking Rich for the accolades. He's the one that got me about 5 or 6, 7 years ago and said, we need help, you need to use postcards. He didn't tell me all the other stuff that's going to follow. But then I have to tell Rich and his lovely bride Evelyn, congratulations on your new grandchildren. Twins. Twins, it was 2. Thank you, everybody. We did talk about the weekend coming up. We've been invited to act as coordinators for all the veterans. We have 30-some veterans that will speak in the hangar. It's just amazing to meet these guys and work with them. I'm looking forward to it. We expect to have about 30,000 people there and 1,700 reenactors. It's going to be a big, big event. So if you haven't done it into your weekend, see if you can get in. Hopefully we don't get any bad weather. We're in a hangar, so we don't have to worry about that. This opportunity to work with World War II weekend came from a group in Allentown. They were invited to handle it, and they called us, Kurt, Laura, we met. We didn't know the scope and scale, and we didn't want to commit ourselves until we knew how much was involved. And we're glad we did. And it's going to be a benefit for us moving forward, because our challenge, as you know, is to get speakers. World War II speakers are leaving us every day. Our memory leaves us every 4 minutes. So this will help us. This group in Allentown has sent us Nate Klein, Bert Windsor, Matt Gutman, Hank Kudzik, Malin Fink, Calvin Summers, your buddy. And we sent them Richard Boyd, Howard Villa, Wally Clark, Art Staley, Dick Brown, and Bob Wilcox. So it's a very synergistic relationship. We share back and forth. It's worked out quite well. On the horizon, I have a George Stauffer, who was a B-24 bombardier, Mount Casino in Italy, Palestia oil fields. Sal Castro is set up for next month. He's Army from New Guinea, Mauritania, and Lady Gulf. I also, is Ron Miller here? Ron introduced me, called me, said, I want you to meet somebody. And we went and interviewed this somebody. Turns out his name is Hans Nass. He's a Hitler youth that joined the Waffen SS as a tank commander. At a tank commander at age 18, and he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And he was in Budapest, in the meadow, Tiger II tank, the big ones. And the sun came up, and he said he was looking at 3,000 Russian tanks, and they had 60. And they attacked him, and he knocked out 15 tanks. He got the equivalent of an Iron Cross, which the commander of the group gave to him, and he understood that it came from Hitler personally, and he gave it back to him later. He says, I can't accept this. He got it from Fuhrer. So we're talking to him about coming and speaking here. I also talked to some of the vets I'm going to work with this weekend. David Tuck is a Holocaust survivor. I'd like to have him here. I forgot about Nass, the German. He surrendered to Patton. And he says, I love Patton. I said, you love Patton? You surrendered to him? They defeated you. He said, from his lips to my ears, he said, keep your weapons. We're not going to do anything. The whole German army, just stay right where you are. I forget what division it was. Just keep your weapons. We're going after the Russians. He said, that came from Patton's lips. Then I read the book, Killing Patton, and there might be something to that Russian espionage. I don't know. We have a guest from Ohio. We have a guest from Ohio. I'm going to read. He's a World War II veteran. I'm going to read his biography quickly, and then we can go on. He enlisted at Fort MacArthur, San Pedro, Fort Lewis, Tacoma, Packhill, Howardson broken into 7 pieces, Fort Sill, Fort Bragg, battles in Sicily, Normandy, Holland, Battle of Bulge, Germany. I could go on and on. I know we're rushed for time. But would Rodney, would you please stand? Rodney Kramer from Ohio. We'd like to recognize your service. Now I have a promise from his son Ken that when Rodney comes back next year, he'll be one of our speakers. But we wanted to recognize him tonight. So we're at that point now. The last thing I have to say is, Rich should get a salary. The best thing in the world is working with World War II veterans. But you just get so emotional. And we just lost one, Boyd Demming. And he went with us to Caesar somewhere. He went with us on a tour to Europe, and we spent 2 weeks, 14 days there with Floyd and Jake. God bless them both. But keep Floyd in your thoughts and prayers. I'm glad he was.
I just wanted to mention that.
I'm sorry, Marty.
I just wanted to mention that. I was wondering if it inspired me to come here in the first place, and in our church, which is pretty large, we were the last 2, and I think he let me down because I was a little older, and I was supposed to go before him. So we're going to have to talk about that when I get there.
Thank you.
In all fairness, when I went to the service, he was the first one in the parking lot, and he was going and mumbling about Floyd shouldn't have left yet. I was next. Is that right, Marshall? Certainly was.
Okay, Charlie, do your thing.
One last thing. Glenn Perrin had a question on DC-3, but it's different. What's that, Glenn?
It's the DC-3 is the civilian version of the C-47.
C-47. And Clem, if you'll save that question for the doctor, he'll be able to answer it, and definitely want to have some discussion on that. Thank you very much.
All right, without further ado, we'd like to have our speaker come up and speak to us. Would you like to introduce him for us? Oh, there, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to let you know we have another guest in the house from Ohio. So, Buckeye State's moving in. And this guest started out the week with great plans for his family to come to central Pennsylvania, not only for the Round Table and World War II weekend, but for a family vacation. Bring his wife and his daughter. And they had to cancel. His wife and daughter could not come along. Rob insisted that this was not an imposition. He loves talking with World War II veterans and coming. While we were at dinner at 6:15, his mother-in-law was actually in surgery. So she is out and doing well, and we're very, very lucky to have Rob here. I heard him speak in Minneapolis last April, and his military lineage dates back to the pre-Revolutionary War times. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob. I hope your ears had some caffeine and you are ready to listen. So, Rob Ellers.
And you got 15 minutes.
Okay, 15 minutes for me is an impossibility. But if you begin to fall over in your chairs or just get up and leave, I'll know I've spoken too long. My name is Rob Ellers. I served for about 24 years in the Air Force, not the Army Air Forces. I'm keenly aware that I'm not part of that august group, but I have studied them. I have talked with many of them. B-17 pilot wrote a letter for me to get me into officer training school. Used to hunt on his land as a boy. That whole World War II generation, they were really my mentors. My uncle served anti-submarine warfare duty. My dad was a bit young, but served during Korea, volunteered. My brother volunteered for Vietnam. He's a little bit older than I am. And then I followed up sort of the other end of the spectrum at the end of the Cold War and joined the wrong service, according to them. They were Army. I joined the Air Force. So sorry about that. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is something that you might not have heard much about, and that is the air intelligence effort in European theater and how air intelligence came together with a far superior Allied grand strategy, really effective planning, committees, organizations, processes, and some really brave and courageous airmen to destroy the German transportation and oil systems in Europe and shorten the war significantly in the process. So, can we go back to the first one? I love it. That's it. Okay, so I like to talk in pictures because I'm just a simple kind of guy. So this is really what we're going to be talking about. I wrote a book about this a number of years ago. The title of the book is Targeting the Third Reich, Air Intelligence in the Allied Bombing Campaign. So I changed this title slightly because the interaction of intelligence, air power, and obviously most fundamentally in a total war for national survival, armies conquering ground, all that came together to produce a victory that was significantly less costly and much more rapid than would otherwise be the case. So I want to just kind of orient you to what I'm going to be talking about here. In the very top left and right corners, you see some intelligence analysts doing stuff that really doesn't look very exciting. Trust me, I've done a lot of that, and some of it is not very exciting. But it's important. What they're doing is looking at target folders. And in another picture, if I were to put it up there, you would see them looking at strike and post-strike photographs. So they would know when to make recommendations about when bombers should restrike a target that was about to come back online, an oil plant, a railroad marshalling yard, something of that nature. And in the other corner, you see a group of these intelligence professionals at a place called Gainesfield House, or RAF Medmenham, as it was called during the Second World War. Ultimately, by 1944, there were about 5,500 people at Medmenham, just over half American. But the British led the effort, and I'm going to tell that story. You'll notice that a number of those people, if you can certainly see the ones on the left, 2 of the 3 are female. Just about half of the photo interpreters and other intelligence professionals in the Second World War in the RAF were female because their manpower was utterly tapped out. Okay, by the time of the D-Day invasion, the British were disestablishing divisions because they couldn't fill the rosters anymore. So women played, if it's possible, they played an even more integral role in a lot of ways in Great Britain than they did here. And we know how much women did here in intelligence and in other, in other kinds of jobs. So this was a really kind of odd integrated group, but a really important group. What they did, among other things, was to take film that came off of those 3 aircraft you see at the top center, painted in a nice blue color. So when they flew at 36,000 plus feet, very fast, very high, they were hard to see. One on the left is a Spitfire PR, that's actually a PR-1. That's the last flying Spit PR-1 in the world. There were later versions, that's the last one flying. The middle one is a Mosquito, built largely of different kinds of wood. So it was a radar-absorbing, very difficult to see, very fast aircraft. And the one on the right is the one that the U.S. Army Air Force has pressed into service. That is a P-38 Lightning, the reconnaissance version known as the F-5. And that was joined later by the F-13, which was a P-51 variant late in the war. Okay, so what these individuals did was to help guide the young men on some of the aircraft that you see at the bottom center. B-17s, B-24s, Lancasters, and others. They guided these individuals to targets all over Europe, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their bases. And they rocked these targets pretty hard. And in the process, collapsed the Wehrmacht's mobility, they collapsed the German war economy, and they made it incredibly difficult for the Germans to fight. They made it impossible for the Germans to fight the way the Germans preferred to fight, which was Bewegungskrieg, or mobile warfare, blitzkrieg, right? Difficult to do without fuel, okay? They still took an incredible toll and fought to the end. Their will didn't break, but their capabilities went this way because they could not fight the way they wanted. And close to the end of the war, they were running out of ammunition. They were out of fuel for the most part. And we'll talk about how that happened, okay? Really, it happened, if you want to look at the pictures, tell a story. On the left there is a German synthetic oil plant called Zeitz. The Germans had 19 major synthetic oil plants that took coal and turned it into gasoline. The Germans didn't have very much natural crude, one of the many reasons they invaded the Soviet Union, and tried, not very effectively, to get to the oil fields in the Middle East. They didn't have enough oil. They were oil short, okay? So they built these huge synthetic oil plants that took coal, turned it into fuel. That is what's left of Zeiss after a concerted bombing effort by U.S. Army Air Forces and Bomber Command. Obviously, one bombed during the day, and the other bombed during the night. The picture on the other side is Trapp, which is a major marshal yard rail center outside of Paris. The before picture is on the bottom. Looks neat and tidy, like the French rail network usually look. The after picture is when, after Bomber Command engaged in a night precision raid with 227 various bombers of various types, short Sterlings and others. And that facility did not run any more trains for the rest of the war. Now, what you have to understand is the Germans were incredibly reliant on the Reichsbahn and the train network to move their troops. They were not motorized the way American units were, or even British units. Okay, so they needed trains to move, and they needed fuel to move the vehicles they had because those vehicles were proportionately more important because there were less of them. They needed more of that stuff, and they were unable to continue to receive it largely because of this. Okay, let's press. So with that horribly long introduction, let's move on. Let's move to the bottom line up front, or as we say in the military, the bluff. Okay, air intelligence and heavy bombers proved to be a superb team. They didn't often think of themselves as a team until they had worked together for a while, and then they figured out, yeah, okay, we kind of get this. listen to each other, we help each other, we can do good things. The air intelligence effort had to do several things to help the bomber pilots. One of the things it had to do was determine German fighter order of battle and help the bombers through tactical, what was called the Y service, tactical radio intercepts and other things, to defeat the Luftwaffe. Because there wasn't going to be any bombing of the Reich until there were fighter escorts and Luftwaffe was finished. And that happened from January to March, April of 1944. We'll talk about that. That was the critical thing that had to happen before all of these bombing campaigns could happen. Once they started in earnest, they destroyed the German oil and transportation infrastructures. The Germans were already losing the war. They were going to lose. But the question was, how much longer were they going to fight, and how many more people were they going to kill in the process? And the answer is probably, and we'll talk about why this is, 3 to 4 months longer and another 1 million Allied Red Army troops. Which doesn't sound like a lot unless one of those individuals was your son, husband, brother, or somebody else. Right? So the end of the war came faster because of this. So the demotorization of the Wehrmacht followed. The German war economy collapsed. Not only could they not produce enough stuff, but they couldn't get it to the battlefronts. Not a good thing for the Germans. The Grand Alliance was able to move forward more quickly. When I say Grand Alliance, I mean American, British, and Red Army troops. Okay? And so just again, Ellers with his picture thing, the Germans, as we said, relied heavily on horses to move everything but their elite units. Their spearhead units were motorized, were mechanized. By late 1944, they were doing a lot of stuff like that with their cars. This is not an effective or an efficient way to use an automobile. Okay? They were doing a lot of stuff like that with their tanks. That happens to be the defense of Berlin, so it's very late in the war. But well before that, they were out of fuel. Now, same thing, this is significantly earlier. That's a Panzer IV Mark IV-H in the middle, out of gas. That's a King Tiger at the end of the Ardennes offensive, Battle of Bulge, out of gas. Those are some of the 7,500 German aircraft that had no fuel and too few pilots. Then they were everywhere. They were sitting all over the place. They couldn't get them up in the air. Okay? So the Allies understood what they had to strike, and they went after it. And when I say they, I mean the intelligence folks who helped to prep the air crews. But I'm talking about the air crews. They went after this stuff day and night. Okay? So think about the Germans' preferred way of war, method of war. Bewegungskrieg. Highly mobile, striking hard, counterattacking, aggressive. All of the things the Germans, as some of the best, if not the best, tactical formations of the war, were good at doing. Think about what they could have done with all that if it worked, and it was well organized, and it happened their support. Sort of like what they did during the first 3 years of the war. Well, they weren't doing that anymore by mid to late 44. Okay, next. Yes, one of history's finest figures, Fuhrer. He decided that he would have a war. And there is the German, some small part of the German army marching past the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And the map shows you the maximum extent of Axis control of Europe and parts of Russia. So these guys came within a hair of winning. Don't think for a minute that the Allies were predestined to win the war. They were not. They could very easily have lost. It was as much a matter of serious German and Japanese and other Axis mistakes as it was Allied toughness. Allies didn't begin to outproduce the Germans and the Japanese until 1943. Okay? So, to put this all in context, why does air intelligence and heavy bombers, who cares? Well, this is why you should care. They care. This is a total industrial war for national survival. Especially if you were the Brits, isolated on that island, as you guys discussed earlier, hanging by a thread. The U.S. knew, Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew, that if Britain went and the government of Britain had to come to Canada, where it was going to go in exile, if it happened, that the U.S. was going to become the front line. And that's not really anything the U.S. wanted. Took a while to wake up to that, but the U.S. woke up. At Casablanca, January 1943, Roosevelt, unbeknownst even to Churchill, stood up and announced, "We will accept nothing less than the unconditional surrender of the Axis forces." That let everybody know that this was a fight to the finish, a total war, including our enemies. And they were not going to stop. So they were going to fight to the finish. But Roosevelt made it clear, and Churchill had already made it clear, as you heard in the excerpt from one of his speeches anyway, that they were going to push this to the end. And so whatever they could put in the air, on the ground, at sea, to end this thing, they were going to do it. Okay? Moral and ethical concerns were not as big a deal. And I would suggest to you that they would not be as big a deal to Americans or Europeans now if their survival was at stake. Okay, lots of people like to decontextualize and recontextualize the bombing campaigns and talk about whether they were evil or not. I'm not going to go down that route. I'm simply going to tell you that the vast majority of people who were under the Axis boot or under the threat of being put under the Axis boot did not really worry very much about that. They wanted the war over. They wanted their kids, their husbands, their brothers, their relatives back alive. That's it. So we can have another talk at some point about the moral and ethical issues of bombing, but this is not it. I'm going to talk about other stuff tonight. Okay? The Allies had to use combined arms effort. They had to learn from the Germans, and they had to get better at doing what the Germans did than the Germans were, which is what the Red Army did, which is what the Americans and the British ended up doing. Or at least as well, put it that way. Okay? At the end of the day, it was armies that had to take ground. This was the kind of war where armies had to take ground, but they couldn't do it without a long seaborne logistical pipeline, ships delivered well over 90% of all supplies to all the fighting fronts. They could not do it anywhere near as cheaply, I hate to use that word, but with anywhere near the low casualties, the relatively low casualties that the Allies suffered compared to the Axis, without air power. They had to use these weapons, these capabilities, in coordination with each other very carefully. Okay? So the Americans lost about 440,000 men killed and about another 80,000 missing in the Second World War. That was a lot. But the Germans lost 8 million. So you kind of think about that, right? It was a big, big, ugly war, and we needed to use everything we had, and that included intelligence and bombers, heavy bombers, 4-engine bombers. So, this is not a story about how air power won the war. It didn't. This is a story about how heavy bombers and other kinds of aircraft helped in what I would call a combined effort, combined arms effort, and a combined effort with the British. Okay, next. All right, a little more context. The British had known for a long time, since the mid-30s, that the Germans had serious vulnerabilities with oil and transportation. The problem was getting to the targets, because the Germans already had a fairly decent air defense system in place by the time the war started, and it grew fast. Okay, that's a Freya radar way up in the, complemented by the circular-looking Würzburg, which is not up there. You can see some BF-109 and E-109 fighters. You can see rail, mobile, 88-millimeter anti-aircraft guns. These traveled all over Germany to wherever they thought a raid might be coming and opened up. And they took their cues from, again, radar and the German version of the Y service, which were people listening to aircrew transmissions on radio, saying, okay, I got a formation coming this way, go after it. So it was a pretty lethal enemy, and the British simply could not get through in the daylight. We'll talk more about that. The Americans ultimately were able to. But they split the duty day and night. We'll talk about how that happened. Okay? So, we talked a bit about the fact that the Germans had a preferred way of war, to put them on their heels, stop them from doing that. The Luftwaffe had to go first. So air intelligence and heavy bombers kind of developed naturally together. And what I'm going to talk about specifically, 3 campaigns tonight. The transportation campaign before the Normandy landings, designed to isolate the battle space, the battle area, and to make it difficult for the Germans to reinforce and to resupply, which it most certainly did. The transportation campaign against the Reich itself, which was designed not just to collapse the German war economy, which was almost entirely dependent on coal. And coal's heavy. And you can't move coal if you don't have trains. So the Germans had a double bind with their trains, their transportation network. They needed it to move soldiers and tanks and everything else, and they needed it to move coal. And so it was a twofer to take out transportation network in Germany. Okay? And then, of course, aircraft production, V-weapons, ball bearings, all kinds of other target sets that proved important, but I don't think quite as important as these. And support to the Red Army was a critical reason for the transportation campaigns. The transportation campaign, the 15th Air Force launched from Italy, was all about speeding the advance of the Red Army by smashing up railroads, road junctions, bridges, everything else that the Germans needed to wage war effectively, especially on the southern part of the Eastern Front. Next slide. Okay, so how did this all happen? The British figured out by about 1935, when Adolf Hitler declared that the Luftwaffe was back, the German Air Force was officially back in being, that there was probably a war coming. And they decided, we're going to need to do something. So they called on the experience they had put together during the First World War. Now, I know that sounds really weird. The First World War, they were just flimsy little biplanes, right? Well, yes, but they got better as the war went on. And by the time the war ended, the Handley Page 1500, which was a heavy bomber by those standards, could carry 5,000 pounds of bombs and reach Berlin. And so there were air intelligence organizations that developed in 1917, 1918, in both the newly independent RAF, spring of 18, and then what was called the Army Air Service, the first iteration of the Air Force, Air Service, Air Corps, Army Air Forces, 1947, the Air Force, right? So it moves through different names. They developed intelligence capabilities, right? And they got pretty good. They cataloged all the German targets in the Ruhr, especially artificial nitrogen production plants, because normally you get that stuff, believe it or not, or they used to make ammunition from guano. Bird and bat droppings, I kid you not. And when the British naval blockade went into effect, they didn't get any more of that stuff. Guano was all gone. So they had to figure out how to draw nitrogen out of the air to produce ammunition. And the British had a big plan to bomb all these and demunitionize the German army. The war ended before they could do it. The stalemate broke on the West. But in the meantime, all of this photo interpretation kind of capability, figuring out troop movements, looking at photos, all that stuff developed. Reconnaissance aircraft, intelligence organizations, so forth. Okay, then the war ended, and everybody went back to civilian life. The Americans utterly disbanded their nascent air intelligence capabilities and did not reinstate air intelligence organization officially until July of 1941. The British left 8 officers and about 30 enlisted personnel in their intelligence directorate within the air industry. That's what they had left. Okay? So it was a peace dividend, right? We've seen that before. At least I have in my lifetime while I was serving. Didn't feel like much of a dividend for those of us who were left. And I'm sure that's how those guys felt, all 38 or so of them. But what they did have was a nice long list of all the people who had worked with them in the war. And when the next war started, they said, okay, put your uniform on, we'll give you an extra rank or 2, come on back. and they started to rebuild this organization. Okay? Surveying and mapping proved incredibly important during the interwar period. As a guy who became a one-star general in the U.S. Army Air Forces, George Goddard, who produced cameras, very advanced cameras. British had their own very advanced cameras, and they did a lot of mapping, they did a lot of surveying. The problem is that the kind of aircraft they used were really slow and really vulnerable. They needed high, fast flyers, and they got those eventually. Okay? And one of the key guys that helped them get them was that dude on the left there on the phone, staged probably, but looks pretty cool, named Sidney Cotton. Sidney Cotton was an interesting guy. Served in the Royal Flying Corps, which became the Royal Air Force in the First World War. Then, during the interwar period, became very wealthy, leading surveying and mapping efforts for the British Empire. And as war approached, made a number of business trips to Germany. His business trips involved a de Havilland aircraft that had some very modern cameras on it. And when he flew back and forth on all of these business trips, he took, about 5,000 aerial photographs of the entire Ruhr and a lot of other important places. And so when the war started, the British Army had target flippers for their so-called Western air plans, right, to bomb Germany. That's the good news. They already had this stuff going. So you can see a camera going into the side of a spit. That's an 8-inch focal length camera. You can see a spit right there coming back from the mission. But here's the big problem for the Brits. Okay, the best bomber they had at the start of the war was the Wellington 1, which is there in formation, looking pretty. They planned to take these things into the Reich during daylight hours, and they did twice, because 80% of them didn't come back. And they only had 3 guns on them. They were 303 caliber guns. We're not talking about a flying fortress here. And at the Helgoland Bight and a couple of other places, they were swarmed by German fighters and almost annihilated. And so they decided, well, we've got this great intelligence capability that we developed for daylight bombing. We can't use it. So we need to bomb at night. We're going to need to build a night intelligence capability. And so they did. So they built photogrammetric machines, the big, huge machine in the middle there, that would help them very precisely figure out the coordinates of targets so that they could send Pathfinder elite units, bomber units forward. They would drop flares, and then the bomber stream, they didn't use combat boxes, the stream of bombers would then bomb over those flares. They got better and better and better at it. And one of the reasons they got so good at it is because of people like the young lady there with what's called a stereoscope, a stereoscopic device. The aircraft were designed, the cameras in the aircraft took what were called stereo pairs. They took photos with 65% overlap between the photos. And when you slid those photos together underneath this optical device, the magic of the optical device and the optic nerve produced a 3-dimensional, you could see the relief, you could see shadows, you could see height, you could see depth, you could see width, you could see things that you couldn't see before. That helped everybody in the intelligence effort and the air crews to figure out ultimately where the most important stuff was, how the Germans were camouflaging it, how they were trying to hide it, and how to strike it. Okay, next slide. All right, so the paradox. This is the paradox. British, as we discussed, had planned for daylight bombing campaigns. Did not work. Could not carry it out. Lost too many bombers. Okay, they were going to bomb the Ruhr. They were going to bomb nitrogen plants and other things, the same kind of target sets that they had looked at in World War I to try to keep the German army from building too many munitions or aircraft or spare parts of various kinds. So they had to move to night bombing. But their original air intelligence effort, 6 years of it, was designed for daylight bombing. And so, who do you think benefited most from that when they showed up? Yeah, the U.S. Army Air Force. And it was a beautiful coming together in terms of an allied effort, in which all of these target folders, there's for those of you who know, who the Air War Plans, Division Plan 1 authors were. There was a guy named Hansel, General Hansel. They called him Possum. He was a little bit like a possum, or at least they say he did. General Spots sent him back from the United Kingdom with an airplane full of target folders, 1,400 of them. Copies, obviously, the British had their own, but they had extras for us. They said, why don't you study these a bit? And when you've studied them, let's get together and talk about what we're going to do. Right? And what they did was a lot. Now, did the British do nothing useful with their bombers? No. They did some very important stuff. One example, those are barges down there. You see them?
Yeah.
That map next to it? You see all the lines going from Europe to Great Britain? That was called Operation Sea Lion, Seelöwe. That was the planned German invasion of the United Kingdom. 3 things stood in the way: the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, and the English Channel. The Germans collected barges from all over Western Europe. They had about 12,000 barges collected. The British had gotten very good at flying night missions along the coast because you could distinguish features on the coast, unlike flying inland, right? And they ended up destroying somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 of these 12,000 barges. Don't know exactly, but got a lot of good stuff that says, okay, not only did the RAF defeat the Luftwaffe in the air, but just to kind of help out, the bombers smashed up a lot of these barges, and the Germans literally had just about 60% of the carrying capacity that they'd had before. Now, everybody says British area bombing, or city bombing, as it's called, was all about terror. Well, it was designed to break the will. It was, and it was nasty stuff. Okay? Firebombs, incendiary devices, what they call blockbusters, 4,000-pound bombs that were designed to tear apart whole blocks. And the incendiaries, 10 to 15-pound bombs, then set everything on fire. The British did this not because they were utterly heartless, although they did not like being bombed themselves and were happy to return the favor. They did this because, given the technology of the day, that's the best they could do. There were only 2 places they could strike directly at Germans. One was with bombers, and the other was North Africa. And they weren't doing well at the time in North Africa because a gentleman named Rommel was down there messing them up. Okay? And it was the RAF largely that sort of kept them in the game down there. But that was the subject of another book I wrote. So we'll go into that some other time, I hope. All right, so a report came out that said, look, you guys did nicely on the barges, but otherwise, 1 bomber in 3 is getting within 5 miles of its target, hitting within 5 miles of its target, if it releases its bombs at all. The British said that's not good enough. So this is when this development of night capability, or night air intelligence capabilities, and night bombing capabilities, concentrating a bomber stream so that you could get 1,000 bombers literally over a target in 40 minutes. Boom. Right? And then figure out what you did. And some of the stuff they did was pretty significant because they bombed the center of the city. Later they shifted to the marshalling yards, the big rail yards, in the center of the city. Okay? And that's where they bombed. That's where they put their pippers, right? And a lot of German industry was in these older sections, especially things like electronics, propellers. The Germans were so short of propellers, they became the #1 salvage item. They had whole squadrons of aircraft sitting around as early as 1942, waiting for propellers. Okay? So there were all kinds of unforeseen effects that Bomber Command had. What we remember most people remember Bomber Command for is this, Butcher Harris, Arthur Harris, we're going to burn them out, etc. It was nasty stuff, don't get me wrong. But again, it was a total industrial war for national survival. So, what you see over there is a machine shop destroyed in British night bombing. Imagine if you're an intelligence analyst and you're looking at those 2 pictures on the right and trying to figure out what's going on there. What did we hit? What was the effect of what we did? Was it effective in helping us with our war effort? I did intelligence stuff for years, and that just makes me want to cry. I don't even know what to do with that. They got really good at it. Okay, next slide. All right, so, sorry, that's just me messing with my mic. I'm not used to being wired like this. Very strange stuff. I'm generally wired myself, but not with mine. All right, so remember we talked about from one bomber to the next, they had guns that fired up at 45-degree angle. No subsequent fuel tanks. The British started to lose more and more aircraft this way. But they also smashed up a lot of stuff, and they got good enough that they were able to engage with their elite crews in night precision bombardment missions, like Peenemünde. Who's heard of Peenemünde? The big research center where the Germans built the V weapons. They hammered that place in 1943. In 44 and 45, they hammered rail centers. They hammered synthetic oil plants and other oil plants. Okay? The Americans had a different approach, as you well know. That is a visual depiction of, you see pictures of combat boxes there. And that, you can't really read it, but I thought it was kind of ironic. That's in German over there, where all the little specks are. Those are bombers. That is 3 wings flying in combat box formation. So basically an air division flying in combat box formation. The idea was that the 50 caliber machine guns on the B-17s would provide for a self-defending capability. They were called the Flying Fortress, after all. The B-24, also very heavily armed, same concept. Luftwaffe crews were absolutely terrified of the bombers, but they went after them anyway because they were bombing their homeland. And whether you like Germans or not, they kind of felt like, well, we're going to shoot them down before they bomb our homeland. Right? So they went in hard. And the Americans found that they could not sustain the losses without getting estimates next. All right, so there was this problem with the Luftwaffe. You can have the greatest air intelligence capability in the world. You can have the greatest bombers in the world, which the Allies had. But they are not very useful if you can't get over your targets. Right? If airplanes and flak are shooting you down, you're not going to get them. And you're not going to have effects or effectiveness. So, Hap-Arnold said, hey, guys, nice try with an undefended thing, no fighter thing, but we need fighters. And so the P-38 and the P-47 and the P-51 in quick succession showed up. You can see some P-51s up top there. And he put together a plan called Operation Argument, starting with a big week at the end of January 1944. And he said, destroy the German Air Force wherever you find it, in the air, on the ground, and in the factories. Okay? They had to get the Luftwaffe out of the way before D-Day, and they had to get it out of the way before they could go for these major target sets. So, the objective was to destroy the Luftwaffe, and they did. They brought the Luftwaffe to battle. The Luftwaffe, particularly pilots from the Eastern Front, thought, well, I got 200 and some kills, I can take these Yanks. Well, no, because Yanks were slightly better pilots than Russians and flew better aircraft, much better aircraft. Average of 360 hours, of training before they even got in their primary type. It's a lot of hours. Okay? 15th Air Force had particular advantages over the 8th because it could fly through or between weather fronts coming up from Italy. 8th had to battle its way through them. And it's one of the reasons 15th, when it got to its targets in between these fronts, was so incredibly accurate. 8th did well too, but it had weather challenges that 15th didn't have. So, by April, the Allies had air supremacy over Europe. That doesn't mean that there were no German fighters. They flew until the end of the war. And then these big campaigns began. We'll talk about those now. Next slide, please. All right, so here's kind of how the structure of the process of the air intelligence effort went.
photo reconnaissance, or PR units, as they were called, were located close to what was called the Allied Central Interpretation Unit. Once the Americans arrived, remember that fancy looking place called Danes Field House, RAF Medmenham? That's where the Allied Central Interpretation Unit was. Okay? So all of the American and British photo reconnaissance units were all around this place so that they could get the film off the airplanes, do a first analysis right there at the airfield, and get the film over to the Allied Central Interpretation Unit. They had duplicator machines that produced multiple copies of the imagery. At the beginning, they looked at it, and then they passed it to the next shop, and the next shop, and somebody thought, hey, what if we just do it all at the same time? Saved a lot of time, obviously. Okay, so first, second, and third phase imagery exploitation, 12, 24 hours or 2+ weeks of very detailed looking at targets. What did we do to this target? How much did we reduce its production or the number of trains that could pass through? And most importantly, if this target is going to come back online, when is it going to? So we can plant another raid to knock it out again. Okay? So there was a lot of time and a lot of coordination involved. There were distribution lists for all of the units, all of the commands, all the organizations involved in this process, sometimes up to 430 or so addressees. And so the process kind of went, it was a multi-agency, a multinational effort. It had organizations like the British